Who let this old woman in here? She can't even afford the coffee. The sales associate said it loud enough for half the floor to hear. He didn't bother lowering his voice. He didn't think he needed to. The woman standing near the entrance of Harrington's department store on Bloor Street didn't flinch. She adjusted the strap of her canvas bag, the kind you get free at a grocery store, and walked slowly toward the coat display. Her gray hair was pulled back with a plain elastic. Her winter boots were scuffed at the toe. Her jacket was the olive green kind that had been out of fashion for 15 years. She looked like someone's grandmother who had wandered in from the cold. She was, but that was only part of the story. Let me take you back to 2 hours before that moment on the main floor, to a kitchen in the annex neighborhood of Toronto, where Margaret Eleanor Chow was standing at her window watching the first real snow of November settle over the backyard. She was 67 years old. She had buried a husband. She had raised 2 children, mostly alone after Raymond's accident. She had worked 31 years as a structural engineer at a firm that had put her name on buildings she still walked past sometimes. Just to remind herself she had done something that lasted. She had retired 4 years ago, quietly, with no party, by her own request. She was not a woman who needed a room to notice her. Daughter, Sophie, 6 years old, sat at the kitchen table eating toast and explaining something important about why penguins were better than all other animals. Margaret listened carefully. She always did. Are you going out today? Quick errand, sweetheart. Back before lunch. Can you bring me something? What do you need? Sophie considered this with the gravity that only a 6-year-old can bring to a Tuesday morning. Something soft. Margaret kissed the top of her head. I'll see what I can do. She didn't tell Sophie what she was actually doing. She never made a production of it. Every few months, Margaret walked into a store or a restaurant or a hotel lobby dressed exactly the way she was dressed right now. No jewelry, no tailored coat, no leather handbag, and she watched how people were treated when nobody assumed they mattered. And she had started doing it after Raymond died, after the hospital experience that she had never fully spoken about in public, but that had never left her either. The way the intake nurse had looked at her husband, a Chinese-Canadian man in his 60s in a worn flannel shirt, and made certain assumptions about whether he was the kind of patient worth rushing for. He wasn't rushed for. Margaret had learned something that day that she already knew but needed to feel in her bones before she could do anything about it. How people are treated in the moments before anyone knows who they are. That is the truest measure of anything, of an institution, of a business, of a person. She was the chair of the Consumer Advocacy Board for the Ontario Retail Standards Council. She had spent the last 6 years helping develop the complaint and investigation framework used by major retailers across the province. When the council received a pattern of complaints about a particular store, Margaret was one of the people who decided what happened next. But today, she was just a woman in scuffed boots. She took the subway to Bloor Street, walked 2 blocks west in the cold, and pushed through the heavy glass doors of Harrington's. The store was warm and bright in the particular aggressive way of upscale retail, the kind of warmth designed to loosen people's grip on their wallets. Soft classical music drifted from somewhere above. The perfume counter near the entrance released a cloud of something floral and expensive as Margaret passed. She paused near the winter coat section on the main floor, took her time, touched the sleeve of a charcoal wool coat, read the tag, set it down. She was not being difficult. She was shopping the way a person shops when they are not in a hurry and have not been made to feel they need to justify their presence. She noticed him before he said anything. Daniel Voss. 26 years old, she would later learn, 11 months at Harrington's, currently on a performance improvement plan for sales numbers that hadn't moved in 2 quarters. He was standing near the accessories wall with the particular posture of a young man who believed his uniform, Dark vest, name tag, Harrington's logo. Conferred authority he hadn't earned elsewhere. He watched Margaret for a full 90 seconds before he walked over. He didn't walk over to help. Can I ask what you're looking for? The question would have been reasonable if the tone had been reasonable. It wasn't, though. The tone was the kind used to ask someone if they are lost. Just looking at the coats, thank you. These start at 420, he said. Just so you know. Margaret looked at the tag she had already read. Yes, I can see that. He didn't move. He folded his arms. We do have a sale rack near the back. Might be more in your range. Around them, 3 other customers browsed without being approached. A woman in a camel coat examining scarves, not approached, in his 40s testing gloves at the display table. Not approached. A young couple near the fitting room, the associate near the door smiled at them warmly and asked if they needed sizes pulled. Margaret noticed all of it. She always did. I'm fine here, thank you, she said. Voss shifted his weight. Something had already decided itself behind his eyes. Some small, certain conclusion about what this woman could or couldn't afford, about whether her presence on this floor made sense, or about whether she was costing him time he could spend on a more promising customer. I'm going to have to ask you to move toward the entrance area if you're not actively shopping. Limited floor space during peak hours. It was 9:40 in the morning. The store was nearly empty. A woman nearby, Margaret would later learn her name was Patricia Ossie, 41, an accountant from Scarborough who had come in to exchange a birthday gift. Looked up, she looked at Margaret, then she looked at Voss. She didn't say anything. She took out her phone and held it loosely at her side, screen pointing forward. Margaret set the coat sleeve down. She adjusted her canvas bag. Limited floor space, she repeated. That's right. I've been standing here for 4 minutes, ma'am. I haven't touched anything I shouldn't have. I haven't made any noise. I came in from the cold to look at coats. Voss's voice dropped, which is what some people do when they want to sound like authority without sounding hostile. Look, I'm not trying to cause a scene. I'm just doing my job. What part of your job requires you to tell me where to stand? He stepped closer. Not threatening exactly, but deliberate. I've been doing this long enough to know when someone isn't a serious buyer. I don't make the rules, I just read the room. He turned away before she could respond. Walked toward the accessories wall. Picked up a display scarf, folded it, set it down, his back to her. His body language said, "We're done here, and you should understand that." Margaret stood still for a moment. There is a particular kind of stillness that comes from decades of experience. Not the stillness of someone who doesn't know what to do. The stillness of someone who has already decided, very calmly, exactly what they are going to do. She took her notebook from her canvas bag. It was a small one, blue, the same kind she had used since graduate school. She uncapped her pen and wrote the time, the date, the associate's name from his badge, a description of the exchange, a list of the other customers she had observed receiving different treatment. Then she kept shopping. She spent another 22 minutes on the main floor. She looked at 3 coats, 2 scarves, and a display of leather gloves near the window. Nobody helped her. Nobody looked at her again except to look away. On her way out, she stopped at the customer service counter. The woman behind it, the young employee named Kezia, with bright eyes and a tired posture, the posture of someone who has apologized on behalf of others too many times, looked up. Can I help you? I'd like to know the name of the store manager on duty today. A pause. Can I ask why? I'd like to speak with them. Kezia hesitated. Then she picked up the desk phone and made a brief call. When she set it down, her expression had shifted slightly. The careful, practiced neutral of someone trying not to show that they already had a feeling about where this was going. Mr. Beaumont will be right with you. Thomas Beaumont was the assistant regional manager. He had been covering this location for 3 weeks while the store manager was on leave. He came down from the second floor briskly, the way of a man who had dealt with complaints before and believed most of them could be resolved with a warm handshake and a discount code. He put out his hand. "Thomas Beaumont, how can I help you today?" With Margaret Chow. She shook his hand. "I'd like to tell you about an experience I had on your main floor this morning." Beaumont listened. His expression maintained its professional pleasantness for approximately 45 seconds. Then something shifted. A small flicker. The kind that happens when a name connects to something in the back of someone's mind. "I'm sorry, did you say Margaret Chow?" "Yes." He looked at her. The canvas bag, the scuffed boots, the gray hair. His mouth made a shape, but no sound came out of it. "The Margaret Chow who, are you on the—" "I'm the chair of the Consumer Advocacy Board for the Ontario Retail Standards Council," she said. "We received 14 formal complaints about this location in the past 8 months. 6 of them were related to differential treatment of older customers and visible minorities, here as part of a standard observational review." The warmth drained from Beaumont's face, the way color drains from something exposed to too much light. "Miss the air. Chow." His voice had changed entirely. "I had no idea. If I had known you were coming, we would have— I want you to know this is not reflective of our standards. This is not. That's exactly the problem, Mr. Beaumont." He stopped. "You would have behaved differently if you'd known I was coming. Your associate behaved the way he did because he assumed no one important was watching. What I saw on your floor this morning is not an aberration. It is what happens here when the people in charge are not looking. And I would ask you to consider very carefully how many customers have walked out of this store feeling the way I felt this morning and simply never came back." Beaumont's hands were at his sides. He had the look of a man rapidly reorganizing a very large number of things in his head. "What happens now?" he asked. It was a genuine question. Something had gone out of him. The practiced confidence, the quick resolution energy. He was asking because he actually didn't know. "I'm going to complete my report. The council will make contact through formal channels. In the meantime, I would suggest you review your floor team's conduct policies and ask yourself how your associate understood it to be acceptable to tell a customer who had done nothing wrong, that she did not look like a serious buyer." There, she capped her pen. She put her notebook away. "I'd also like to buy that charcoal wool coat, size small, if that's possible." Kezia, who had been standing very still behind the counter through all of this, let out a breath that had clearly been held for some time. "Of course," she said. "I'll get it wrapped up." The formal complaint was filed the following morning. The council's investigation opened within the week. The council's investigator, a methodical woman named Sandra Park, built the case file from Margaret's notes, security footage the store was required to provide, interviews with 6 other customers who had visited the location in the preceding months. 3 of them had filed informal complaints that had not been escalated. 2 had said nothing at the time, the way people often say nothing, because they believed it wouldn't matter. Patricia Osei, the woman who had been standing nearby with her phone, came forward with 4 minutes and 12 seconds of video. She had captured the moment Voss told Margaret to move toward the entrance. She had captured the other customers being greeted with open smiles, while Margaret stood unacknowledged. She had not posted it. She sent it directly to the council after learning about the investigation through a community notice. "I thought about posting it," she said in her statement, "but I wanted it to go somewhere it would actually do something. The investigation found a pattern. It was not just Daniel Voss, it was a floor culture. The kind that develops over time when certain behaviors are tolerated, and then normalized, and then invisible. 3 other associates had received complaints with similar characteristics. Two supervisors had been copied on internal concerns that had not been escalated to management. One regional oversight report from 18 months earlier had flagged the location for training gaps and received no documented follow-up. The council issued its findings 10 weeks after Margaret's visit. Harrington's head office responded within 48 hours. In the careful, slightly breathless language of a corporation that has understood its situation, the statement used the phrases deeply concerned and immediate action and zero tolerance more than once. Thomas Beaumont, who had been covering the location temporarily, was reassigned. A formal management review was triggered for the store's supervisory team. Daniel Voss was terminated. The provincial regulatory body announced that Harrington's would be required to implement a monitored customer conduct training program across all Ontario locations. Within 6 months, compliance would be reviewed. Non-compliance would carry financial penalties. It was the first time the council had issued a province-wide compliance directive to a major retailer in 11 years. Margaret gave one interview. She sat in her kitchen in the annex, the same table where Sophie had explained about penguins 3 months earlier. She wore the same olive jacket. She had been asked if she wanted something different for the camera. She had declined. She spoke for 12 minutes without notes. She didn't talk much about Daniel Voss. What happened to him was a consequence, she said, not the point. The point was what had been allowed to grow in the silence around him. The complaints that were not escalated. The customers who had been made to feel small and had walked out saying nothing. The institutional tolerance for behavior that everyone on some level knew was wrong, but that nobody had found the will to stop. I was there that day because of people who had no title and no platform, she said. People who wrote a complaint and wondered if it would disappear. I wanted them to know that someone received it. Someone took it seriously. Someone went to look. She paused. She looked out the window for a moment toward the backyard, where the November snow had been replaced by the particular gray mud of a Toronto December. I have been underestimated most of my life, she said. I am 67 years old. I am a woman. I am Chinese, Canadian. Girls. I have been in rooms my entire career where someone looked at me and decided, before I opened my mouth, that I was probably not the most important person there in doing this work. All of my work, with that as the weather I move through. I don't want recognition for that, though. I just want people to understand that the woman standing at the coat rack, who looks like she wandered in from the cold, she might have built the building you're standing in. She might have raised the doctor who saved your father. She might be the person who decides whether your business gets to keep operating. She folded her hands on the table, or she might just be a grandmother who wants to buy a coat without being told she doesn't belong there, and that should be enough. That has always been enough. The interview was shared widely. Not viral in the way of things designed to go viral, but steadily passed from inbox to inbox, posted in community groups, sent to elderly parents by adult children who recognized something in it. Shared in teachers' staff rooms and immigrant family group chats and seniors' centers across the country. The comment that got shared the most was from a woman in Halifax who wrote, "My mother experienced this for 30 years and never said a word because she didn't think anyone would listen. It was right and she was wrong. Someone always could have listened. They just had to choose to. Now, let me tell you where everyone ended up. Margaret still takes the subway. She still carries the canvas bag. The charcoal coat, the one she bought that day, hangs by the door of her kitchen, and she wears it to the market on Saturday mornings. Sophie, who is now almost 7, has informed her that it is a good color, and that penguins would also look nice in it. She continued as chair of the Consumer Advocacy Board. The observational review program she had been quietly running for 3 years was formally recognized and funded by the council after the Harrington's investigation. Other provinces are now looking at similar models. She still doesn't announce herself when she walks into a store. She says the point was never to be recognized. The point was to see clearly. Kezia, the customer service associate who had handled that morning with quiet steadiness, was nominated by the regional manager for a Staff Conduct Recognition Award. She didn't win, which is the kind of thing that happens in large institutions. But she was offered additional training opportunities. She had been waiting on for 2 years, and she took them years. She told a colleague afterward that what she remembered most was how Margaret had rested her hand briefly on the counter when the exchange was over, the way of someone acknowledging that the person across from them had done their job well, even when everything around them made it harder. She didn't have to notice that, Kezia said, but she did. Patricia Osei, with the phone, went back to Harrington's the following spring to exchange something. The associate who helped her was warm, unhurried, and greeted her at the door with a genuine smile. She didn't know if it was because of the investigation, or the training, or just that employee on that particular day. She decided it didn't matter. She bought a scarf and tipped the service desk $20 for a local food bank collection that was sitting on the counter. Daniel Voss was not rehired. He gave a statement to a local news outlet several weeks after his termination that contained several variations of the phrase, "I was just doing my job," and one moment, near the end, where he seemed to genuinely not understand that he had done anything wrong. That moment, more than anything else, was the thing that kept Sandra Park up at night. Not his cruelty, she told a colleague, his certainty. The way he had looked at an older woman in a worn jacket and concluded without hesitation that he understood exactly what she was worth. That kind of certainty, Sandra said, doesn't grow in one person. It gets taught, it gets tolerated, it gets passed down, and that's the thing we have to keep pulling up at the root. Thomas Beaumont was reassigned to a compliance training role at head office. Whether that was a demotion or an opportunity depended on who was telling the story. He has, by several accounts, become one of the more engaged participants in the training sessions he now helps run. He talks about a morning in November and a woman in scuffed boots and what he felt when a name finally connected to a face he had already dismissed. He tells the story without flattering himself. That, at least, is something. So, let me ask you something. Think about the last time you walked into a room and felt like someone decided, before you opened your mouth, what you were probably there for, what you could probably afford, what you were probably worth. Maybe it happened to you last week. Maybe it happened to you this morning. Maybe you watched it happen to someone else and said nothing because it didn't seem like your place there. Margaret Chow walked into that store because other people had written complaints that went nowhere. She went to make sure their words landed somewhere they could do something. She went to pay attention on behalf of people who had paid attention too, and had been ignored. That's what this kind of courage actually looks like. Not loud, not performed. Just a woman in a green jacket with a blue notebook and decades of patience, walking through a door in the cold, and refusing, very quietly, visible. If this one stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. If you've ever been in that room, the one where someone looked through you, drop a comment. Because you were not invisible, you never were. And I think it's time more people said so out loud.